The stars had long since abandoned this corner of the galaxy, leaving only the ghost light of dead suns and the soft glow of drifting ruin. Among the cold wreckage, far from any mapped trade lane or active beacon, a human salvage ship, the Astera, floated in slow orbit around a forgotten moon. It wasn't the sort of place where anyone expected a distress signal, let alone one as haunting as the one that pulsed into the void, an untranslatable keening cry that sounded less like language and more like raw grief, like someone had recorded, the moment their soul cracked and fed it through a transmitter. Lieutenant Ellen Rourke heard it first through her neural link as she reviewed the automated scan logs. It hit her in the chest before she even understood what it was, like an old song or a childhood memory she never lived. With trembling hands, she triangulated the signal's origin, a fractured alien vessel wedged into the ice of the moon's equator, broken like a cracked egg. Her first instinct was to report, to wait for clearance, but something in the sound, something almost human, tugged her down to the cargo bay where the emergency suits were kept. There were rumors, of course, told in hushed tones by drunk explorers in low-gravity bars, that some war-shattered worlds sent out ghost calls meant to lure scavengers into traps, that some species mimicked pain to draw on the curious and bleed them dry. But Ellen had spent 5 years on rescue ships before the war and 3 more tending to the broken remains of what used to be called the United Galactic Accord. She had heard the difference between a baited scream and a real one. This one, she knew, came from someone who had lost too much to pretend. She descended alone, in silence, armed only with a translator chip and a heart still tender from the child she had buried 2 years ago. The alien ship had no visible airlock, only jagged tears and the faint shimmer of a surviving containment field. She entered through a breach in the side where the ice had melted away from flickering heat. The interior was chaos, walls scorched, panels torn, and everywhere the smell of old plasma burns and something else, something like lavender and ash. And there, crouched beside a pale, glowing cradle, was the source of the signal, a woman, or something close to one. Her form was humanoid but impossibly thin, her skin pearlescent, her eyes wide and shimmering like opals in a storm. She clutched the cradle with a strength that looked unnatural for her slight frame. Inside it, nestled among glowing threads of silk, were 3 small figures, children, if Ellen could trust her instincts. Their breathing was shallow, their bodies still. The woman looked up as Ellen stepped through the haze. Her mouth did not move, but her voice, fractal and clear, bloomed directly into Ellen's mind. "My children are well behaved. I can be a good wife to you, human. Please, do not leave us behind." Ellen froze. Not because of the words. They were strange enough, but because of the emotion laced through them. Not fear, not even desperation. Hope. Terrible, aching hope. The kind that stings because it has nowhere left to live. The kind a mother might offer when she has nothing else but her own body to bargain with and 3 lives too fragile to move. Ellen didn't answer. She couldn't. She just stepped forward slowly, and the woman, alien, widow, mother, did not flinch. She only whispered again, with more urgency, "I can learn to smile like your kind does. I can keep your quarters clean. My children, do not cry loudly. Please, we're quiet." And then, with sudden clarity, Ellen understood. This woman wasn't offering marriage. She was offering herself as property, like cargo, like salvage. And not because she misunderstood humanity, but because she thought this was the only thing humans would understand. Ellen felt her throat tighten as she reached out a hand. The children stirred faintly, their skin glimmering with faint geometric patterns that changed with each breath. The widow pressed her forehead to the edge of the cradle and shuddered. "Please," she said one last time. Ellen, standing in the dim flicker of a dying ship, felt something deep in her chest crack open, the same place that had once housed a crib of her own. She dropped to one knee, eye level with the alien mother, and whispered, "You're not cargo. You're not a wife. You're safe now." But even as she said it, she knew safety was a word that barely meant anything in this part of space. And something in the walls of the alien ship ... shifted. Asterisk, asterisk, the ship creaked around her like it had breath slow, pained, and ancient. Lieutenant Ellen Rourke stayed kneeling, her gloved hand hovering over the alien woman's trembling shoulder. The stillness in the room was brittle, like the cold glass of a watchful eye. Ellen didn't know what kind of species this widow was. There were thousands catalogued, and more still undiscovered, but she knew the signs of trauma. And she knew when someone had run out of ways to ask for help. The alien mother had curled herself so tightly around the cradle that Ellen feared her bones might snap just from the effort of not breaking down. Her eyes, impossibly large and wet, flicked toward Ellen's face as if trying to decode the expression. There. Ellen softened her voice to a whisper, switching her suit to relay sound rather than direct neural link. She wanted the woman to hear her the way humans spoke when they meant something from the heart. "I'm not here to take you," she said, her voice husky from the dry air. "I'm here to help." The alien flinched at the word help, as though it was foreign or dangerous, and then slowly, painfully, unfolded her arms from around the cradle. She placed her long-fingered hands on her knees, like she was presenting herself for judgment. Ellen's breath hitched. This was a ritual. The widow was performing a plea, perhaps one ingrained in her culture, maybe something past through generations or programmed into survivors after too many wars. She lowered her gaze submissively. "You have found us. That makes you our keeper." Her voice in Ellen's head now came in fractured fragments, as if too much pain made the translation unstable. "Do not discard us before we've served." It twisted in Ellen's gut like a knife. This wasn't diplomacy. This wasn't survival negotiation. This was a final offering, one made by someone who believed the only value she and her children had left was servitude. Ellen rose to her feet slowly, resisting the urge to reach out again. She needed to understand what she was stepping into. She tapped her suit's eye interface and linked it to her ship. "Sarah, this is Lieutenant Rourke. I've located survivors, 1 adult, 3 juveniles. Species unknown, they appear cooperative." A pause, then static. "Lieutenant, your signal's weak. Can you confirm status for evac? Risk level?" She hesitated. The prudent thing, the military thing, would be to assess risk, secure the area, and wait for backup. But every instinct in Ellen screamed that delay meant death for the fragile life she saw in that cradle. These children weren't stasis-bound, they were starving. "They're malnourished. 1 looks critical." "I'm bringing them aboard," she answered, cutting the channel before command could protest. She turned back to the woman. "I need to. Carry your children to medical. I can't treat them here. The air is unstable, and your containment field is failing." The widow blinked. "You will not separate us?" "No," Ellen said quickly. "No, I won't." She moved to the cradle and began detaching the filament-like wiring that tethered it to the ship's dying systems. The children stirred as the warmth faded, one making a soft sound that tugged at Ellen's heart like a ghost of a memory she couldn't fully bear. The mother rose unsteadily, not from weakness, but from something older habitual humility, like a servant rising before a master. Ellen caught her elbow gently, steadying her. "Don't do that," she whispered. "You don't have to shrink." "For me." The woman's eyes widened slightly, then dropped again. "You are human. Your kind took our stars. We know how to make ourselves small." The words hung in the air like frost. Ellen swallowed hard. "Your kind took our stars." A past, wrapped in fire and exile. She said nothing as she helped guide the woman toward the breach. No weapon, no resistance. Only grief and obedience wrapped in a mother's instincts. They moved slowly through the wreck, Ellen bearing the cradle, the widow gliding behind like a shadow that feared the light. When they emerged onto the moon's icy surface, Ellen triggered her locator beacon. The shuttle dropped from orbit like a silent hawk, settling with soft thrusters. As the doors opened, the widow shrank back, not from the ship, but from the unknown. Ellen turned and offered her hand. "You'll be safe," she said again, "I promise." The widow hesitated, then placed her hand in Ellen's, so light it felt like mist. As they boarded, the ship recognized the new biosignatures and pulsed. Read for a second, unidentified species detected. Quarantine suggested. Ellen ignored it. She carried the cradle past the scanner, past protocol, into the medbay where warm light bathed the chrome like morning sun. The children were placed gently into the medical cradle, diagnostic arms flicking into motion. The machines didn't know what species they were treating, but they knew enough to read organ decay, hydration levels, neural flickers. Ellen stood back, her suit unsealing with a hiss. The widow stood at the doorway like a statue, unmoving. "They will die if they're not treated," Ellen said gently. "Do you understand?" "Yes," the woman said. "But I do not understand why you are kind." Ellen sat heavily in a nearby chair, watching the scanners work. She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice cracked a little. "Because Ansasamion was kind to me, and I lived because of it." Silence fell again, but it was a different silence now. Not the hollow kind of space. A quiet filled with watching, waiting, the kind that comes right before a seed begins to grow. Asterisk, asterisk, the children slept in faint pulses of light, their small chests rising and falling with the rhythm of fragile stars. Their skin, so unlike anything Ellen had ever seen, shifted slowly in color and pattern, like tiny galaxies flickering through storms. She sat by them, unmoving, letting the soft hum of the medical cradle fill the room like a lullaby. The widow had not spoken in over an hour. She stood just outside the glass partition of the med bay, her posture painfully straight, hands folded with such stillness that she seemed more memory than flesh. Ellen didn't ask her to sit. She didn't press for conversation. She knew the look of someone who'd lost too much too fast, someone still unsure if kindness was just another mask worn before the blow came. So instead, Ellen waited. She adjusted the settings of the cradle manually, fine-tuning the temperature based on the children's micro-responses. The AI was smart, but not everything could be left to algorithms. Grief had patterns machines could not read. It was in the third hour, just as Ellen was running hydration balance simulations, that the widow finally stepped forward. Her bare feet made no sound on the floor, but Ellen felt the change in the air. "You understand sorrow," the woman said, not as a question. Ellen turned, nodded once. "Yes." The alien's hands trembled as they reached for the edge of the cradle, stopping just short of touching the glass. "Was it a hatchling?" she asked softly. Her voice was less fractured now, more coherent. "Your sorrow, I mean." Ellen's breath caught. She hadn't spoken of her daughter in over 2 years. Not since the evacuation of Eno Station, where the fires had burned so hot they turned oxygen into knives. Her daughter Kaya had been 6, curious, bold, the kind of child who asked too many questions about the stars and never feared the dark. "Yes," Ellen said. "A girl." "And? You could not save her?" The question was not cruel. It was quiet, full of that delicate kind of pain that only mothers share, the kind that threads itself between two strangers and says, "I know what your scream sounds like when it never makes it out." Ellen shook her head slowly. "The systems failed. The escape pods jammed. I got her to the doors, but she was too small, too light. The fire pulled the air before she could breathe again." She hadn't cried in months, but now, as she spoke the words aloud, tears slid silently down her cheeks. Not a flood, just the slow, inevitable leak of a dam cracked by remembrance. The widow stepped closer, her hand finally touching the glass. "I had 5, she said. 2 gone in the breach. Wonder and cryo. These 3. Her voice trailed off like a candle losing air. "I told myself I could not die if it meant they might live. I bartered myself to silence, to smallness. We come in shoes. Used to sing in the garden domes. Now I forget the sound of my own laughter." Ellen stood, crossing the space between them, and placed her palm against the glass beside the widow's. The 2 hands, so different in shape and color and origin, mirrored each other, an unspoken bridge. "You're not forgotten," Ellen said. "And you're not nothing. They'll live, and so will you. Not as my servant, not as some cargo I rescued. As a mother who survived." The widow's voice cracked in her mind like glass under pressure. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you give this to us?" Ellen's reply came like breath itself, "Because it was once given to me. When I thought I had nothing left." She remembered the voice of the medtech who pulled her from the wreckage, who wrapped her burnt hands in gauze and whispered, "You lived. That is enough to start again." The widow looked at her then, fully looked, and in that moment, something fragile shifted behind her opal eyes. A trust faint as a pulse, not full, not yet, but enough to breathe. She stepped into the med bay and knelt beside her children, placing one hand gently over the smallest one's chest. The child stirred at the touch, eyes fluttering open for a heartbeat, then closed again, safe in the warmth. "I do not know your songs," the widow whispered, "but if you wish, I can learn to sing again." Ellen sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder. "No," she said, smiling through the tears. "Sing yours, I'll listen." And in the still silence of the ship, where grief had lived for too long, the widow began to hum, not in any human scale or pattern, but in the haunting, harmonic resonance of her kind. It echoed like wind through hollow stone, like starlight bending around memory. The melody was broken in places, patched with sorrow, yet rich with love. Ellen closed her eyes and listened, not just with her ears, but with that aching place inside. Her that still remembered lullabies and small arms around her neck. 2 mothers, 2 worlds apart, now bound by the simple, uncheckable truth. Pain shared does not divide, it multiplies love. Asterisk, asterisk, it began with a flicker in the medical bay light, small, almost imperceptible, but enough to make Ellen pause in her. Diagnostic updates. The systems aboard the Astera were old, patched together from parts across 3 sectors, and barely holding under the weight of her solitude. But they didn't flicker without cause. A moment later, a second disturbance rolled through the air like static tension unseen but felt. The widow's humming ceased instantly. Her body went rigid, her breath shallow and strained. She stood, her gaze drawn toward the hallway as though something cold had brushed her spine. "They found us," she whispered, though no voice had yet come to her mind. Ellen stared at her. "Who? The ones who chased us through the dark?" Her voice cracked and a shiver of light passed over her skin like alarm signals, subtle but unmistakable. "They were the reason we fled the cradle worlds. They burned our memory from the stars and sealed our names in silence." The lights dimmed again, and now the sound came a faint, high-pitched tremor, like teeth grinding far off in the metal bones of the ship. Ellen tapped her command deck, pulling up exterior scans. An anomaly appeared just beyond the moon's shadow, a dark vessel, wedge-shaped, sharp-edged, like a blade carved from absence itself. No active transponders, no known design. "Unidentified craft, cloaked until now," she muttered, heart sinking as the readings deepened. No life signs detected, but the ship pulsed with energy signatures she'd only ever seen classified under technoparasitic threats. "Living machines, predators, they are not ships," the widow said beside her, voice hollow. "They are not alive, not like you or me. They do not hunger, but they consume. They do not hate, but they erase. When we lost the war, we ran. Those of us with children were marked. Our kind was incompatible." She trailed off as the scans updated. The ship was not alone. 3 smaller vessels had broken formation behind it, and now drifted in toward the moon's orbit like vultures. Ellen's fingers flew over the controls. "Astera's jump drive is recharging. I can't initiate a full warp for another 37 minutes. Shields at half capacity. Weapons ... She trailed off. What weapons? She was a salvager now. Her guns hadn't been charged in months. She wasn't meant for combat anymore. But that wasn't what made her hands tremble. It was the knowledge that they had been followed, not by chance. Tracked, hunted. The widow's voice entered her mind. Again, softer now, like the hush before a scream. "You were kind to us, that makes you a threat?" Ellen turned sharply. "What do you mean?" "They do not fear strength, but they fear mercy. They fear connection. That is how we once hurt them, not with weapons, but with unity." She moved toward her children, placing her body instinctively between them and the threat. "They target anyone who offers sanctuary. To the marked. They erase not just the bodies, but the memory of kindness itself." Ellen felt nausea rise. A war of extermination, not just by blood, but by forgetting. By severing the very story of who someone was. "There has to be a way to fight," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Her mind spun through every possibility: decoys, bluff transmissions, orbital slingshot maneuvers. None would buy enough time. The widow turned to her then. "There is one way," she said, and now her voice bore the weight of old decisions and unbearable cost. "I can give myself to them. If I send a signal now, if I say the children died and that I will return ... they may let you go." "You and them." Ellen's face twisted in disbelief. "You're talking about sacrificing yourself?" "I'm talking about currency. And my life is the only thing they still count." Her expression did not waver. "They will not come near you if I offer myself cleanly. They are cowards when it comes to honest grief." "No," Ellen said immediately, stepping between her and the console. "That's not happening." "Then they will destroy you," the widow said gently. "And the children will die anyway?" Ellen stared into her eyes and saw it not fear, not defeat, but acceptance. The kind of resolve that comes when you've lost too much to gamble. "You said kindness scares them," Ellen said. "Then I won't give you up. I'll show them what a human fight looks like, not with weapons, not with blood, but with defiance." The widow tilted her head. "Defiance?" "Yes," Ellen said, and her voice shook, but only just. "I survived fire. I survived watching my child die in my arms. I carry her in every step I take. You think I'm going to let monsters make me choose between my life and yours?" She moved to the controls, powering up the energy siphons in the ship's spine systems not built for combat, but capable of one desperate move, overloading the reactor to send out a subspace burst. Not enough to destroy the enemy, but enough to blind their scanners. "I can mask us in the burst. Drop a decoy shell, pull a deep dive under the moon's crust. 37 minutes is all I need." "And if they fire?" the widow asked. "Then we take it," Ellen said, but not lying down. Silence fell between them, broken only by the soft beeping of rising energy levels. The children slept on, unaware of the shadows creeping closer. And in that moment, standing beside a mother from a shattered world, Ellen Rourke knew this wasn't just about survival. This was about memory, about refusing to let kindness be erased. She touched the widow's shoulder gently. You're not a burden. You're not bait. You're someone worth fighting for. And though the fear still hung heavy in the air, the widow nodded, not in surrender, but in alliance. Asterisk, asterisk, the stars outside the viewport no longer twinkled. They glared, cold and unblinking, as the enemy vessels slid into full view, no longer cloaked, no longer pretending to be shadows. They were here now with purpose, with certainty, moving with the patience of executioners who knew their blade would find flesh. Inside the Astera, alarms pulsed like a heartbeat just 1 second too fast. The ship's internal temperature dipped as systems rerouted energy to the reactor. 31 minutes until warp drive readiness. The countdown ticked like a drum, leading Ellen straight into the mouth of a storm. She could neither outrun or beat only endure. The widow stood in silence as the ship shuddered with distant pressure waves. They weren't firing yet. They were waiting, watching, like predators that had seen the trick before and were willing to let prey exhaust itself. Ellen knew the psychology of power well. It had been used against her people for generations. Break morale before battle. Make the victim grateful when death finally comes. She leaned over the communications panel, voice steady. Broadcasting a false escape pod launch now. Dummy signature embedded with low-grade plasma trail. Let's see if they buy a ghost. A second later, a capsule hissed out of the ship's belly and rocketed toward open space. The enemy didn't move. They're not stupid, Ellen muttered. They know I haven't given you up. The widow's eyes shimmered again, not from fear, but from resolve. You could still give them what they want. Send me out in truth, not in lie. They will take me, and the rest of you may live. The kindness would not be erased if it ended in sacrifice. Ellen rounded on her, furious. Stop trying to die for me. For them, don't you get it? That's what they want, your surrender. They don't just want to kill bodies, they want to kill courage. They want to kill hope. And what are you willing to kill, Ellen Rourke? The widow asked, voice trembling. What are you willing to become to save us? The question struck like a slap, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Ellen had never wanted to be a soldier again. She had buried her weapons with her daughter's name etched onto a piece of metal she wore beneath her suit, unseen. She had sworn off war, off violence, off the impossible cost of bravery. But this wasn't war. This was a mother choosing to be more than remembered. This was the line where humanity decided what stories were worth living through hell. 4. The ship jolted violently. A warning screamed in red across the console. Contact detected. Hull pressure shift. Grapple beam initiating. They were trying to board. Ellen turned to the widow, breath tight in her throat. If they breach the hull, they'll kill you first. She grabbed a plasma cutter and slammed open the storage locker. We move the kids, now. No, the widow cried, stepping forward. They cannot survive another mental shift. The stress would, her voice cracked. Please, let me be the one they find. Ellen's hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the weight of what came next. I know a place, she whispered. Below the engine deck. Shielded in iron. Not steel old Terran design. They won't detect organics there. We hide the children. You go with them. I'll stay here and stall. The widow stared at her, her whole body seeming to vibrate with disbelief. You would face them alone? I faced worse alone, Ellen said, but I'm not alone now. I've got something to protect. That makes me more dangerous than they'll ever understand. They moved quickly. Ellen cradled the smallest child while the widow lifted the twins into her arms, with a grace carved from muscle memory and raw fear. Down through narrow corridors they ran, through places that I didn't even catalog anymore. The ancient hatch near the ship's spine groaned as Ellen pried it open, revealing a space no taller than a crawl duct, but lined in radiation dampening. Alloys. She placed the baby inside first, then helped the widow slide in beside them. You're not to make a sound, Ellen said, her voice steady now. Not until I return, or until the stars go quiet. The widow looked up, tears trembling on her lashes. Why would you do this? What have we given you that is worth dying for? And Ellen, for once, had no complicated answer, no noble speech. Just the truth. You reminded me what I lost. And why I still breathe. She sealed the hatch. Alone now, she returned to the bridge. The enemy ship loomed large on the screen, its hull rippling with void-black ridges and crimson veins. Ellen strapped herself into the pilot seat and stared. Into the mouth of the beast. A countdown ticked beside her. 20 minutes until warp dot they would come before then. Of course they would, but they would not find silence. They would not find surrender. They would find a human flawed, grieving, broken but burning with something they had tried to kill long ago. Defiance born from love. Asterisk, asterisk. They cut through the ship's hull like it was paper, soundless but devastating. No explosions, no dramatic tremors, just a steady surgical invasion. Systems went dark one by one, flickering out like candles in a storm. Life support dimmed, artificial gravity faltered, and the Asera fell into a slow tilt, caught in the moon's pole. Ellen felt the shift in her bones even before the alarms failed. It was beginning. The hunt, the purge. And she was its lone, unwilling sentinel. She stood on the bridge, arms tight around the plasma cutter and her pulse a war drum. Inside her ears, the air tasted metallic, old blood and machine oil, and every surface hummed with the tension of a coming storm. She could feel them inside the ship now, not with her eyes, but her skin scraping softly along the walls, testing the temperature of hope before extinguishing it. She didn't know how many there were, dozens maybe, or maybe just a few. It didn't matter. They weren't beings in the way a human could understand. They were something worse, a purpose given flesh. She activated the old intercom with a breath and let her voice echo down the hollow bones of her ship. I know why you're here, she said, calm, steady, low. You think you can erase kindness, that you can rip memory out by the root, but not this time. No answer came. Of course not. They didn't speak. They didn't threaten. They only took. But Ellen knew something about taking. She had lived through a fire that stole her daughter's last breath. She had screamed herself voiceless in a wreckage where no rescue came. And still, she had not turned cruel. Still, she had chosen mercy. You want me? She whispered to the empty bridge. Then come. Come and find what happens when a mother's grief turns into fury. The lights went out completely then. Darkness swallowed the room, and in that endless silence, something entered, something tall and jagged and wrong, like a shadow drawn by a hand that had never seen light. Ellen didn't move. She just stared into the void, and the void stared back. The creature stepped forward, not walking, but flowing, shifting between dimensions Ellen's mind couldn't fully grasp. Its shape bent the room, warped it, as if space itself recoiled from its presence. No face, no eyes. Only a ripple of thoughts that weren't thoughts, pressed against her mind like static laced with poison dot, return the marked, erase the act. Memory. Must not survive, Ellen gritted her teeth. No, the thing tilted not its head, but its presence and pushed again. You carry the rot. The lie of empathy. Surrender it. Burn it. Forget. A low hum began in her chest, trembling like a string pulled too tight. The creature was trying to reach into her memory, into the place where her daughter still lived, where the widow's song still echoed. Ellen screamed not aloud, but in the place where love lived, and clung to the image of Kaya's tiny fingers wrapped around hers, of the widow's broken voice humming lullabies in a dying tongue. You don't get to take her. She growled. You don't get to take any of them. She slammed her fist onto the reactor override. Power surged through the hull in a blinding wave, the emergency conduit arcing a burst of raw energy through the frame of the ship. The shadow screamed not in sound but in sensation. A tearing, shrieking horror that made the very air scream. The thing recoiled, its body spasming in a ripple of warped light. Behind it, more shadows came, crawling along the walls, through vents, through space where time bent backward. Ellen knew this was the end. She was no soldier now, no martyr, just a woman with nothing left to lose except the one thing they couldn't erase, the choice to fight back. She ran not to escape, but to draw them in, through the corridors, through the engine shaft toward the core. She let them follow. She wanted them to follow. She triggered every bypass, every feedback loop, every emergency fuse that would flare. The reactors pulsed wide enough to momentarily blind the enemy's senses. They struck at her, slashing through panels, swarming like thoughtless rage, but her pain was a small thing compared to what she had already survived. Blood spilled. Her shoulder burned from a glancing strike, but still she moved. Still, she drew them toward the trap she had built with hands that once soothed her daughter to sleep. At the core, she locked the doors behind her, breathing ragged, arms trembling. She activated the final protocol, full core flare. Manual release. Warning. Lights strobed the room. The enemy pressed against the sealed entrance, screaming silently, clawing at the walls of reality. I'm not here to die, Ellen whispered to them. I'm here to remember. She hit the button, a pulse blinding. Holy, furious surge through the ship. It was not an explosion. It was not fire. It was light, pure, merciful light, enough to scatter the shadows, enough to blind their hive-dash consciousness, enough to make them retreat. She collapsed to the floor, half-conscious, smoke curling from her side. Somewhere deep in the ship, the silence returned. They were gone, not destroyed. Not forever, but repelled. Repelled by one thing they could not consume. A human woman who chose compassion over surrender. Asterisk, asterisk, the silence that followed was heavy. Not empty, a silence that remembered sound, that carried echoes. It filled the corridors of the Astera like a breath held too long, trembling at the edges of every surface. The enemy had fled. Not out of fear, because they did not feel fear, but because something inside them recoiled from the light of a soul, unwilling to break. The reactor core cooled, the lights flickered slowly back to life, and in the heart of the ship's wounded body, Ellen Rourke lay motionless on the floor, her chest rising in shallow, ragged pulls of air. She was alive, but only just. She couldn't feel her right arm. The suit's emergency seal had clotted the worst of the bleeding, but the nerve endings had gone quiet. Her shoulder ached like it had been torn apart and stitched back with fire. Blood stained her neck and cheek, and somewhere behind her ribs, a fracture throbbed like thunder. But she was still breathing, still here. That meant she hadn't failed. The emergency protocol slowly dimmed, lights stabilized. The hum of power returned tentative, uncertain, but growing. Systems rebooted one by one, like old friends blinking awake after a long, terrible dream. Ellen forced herself upright, teeth clenched, vision swimming. She stumbled to the command deck and pulled up life readings. The sealed chamber near the engine core still showed 4 pulses, 3 small, 1 adult, all stable. All alive, relief crashed over her like a wave she couldn't brace for. It knocked the breath from her lungs and left her sobbing quietly, fingers digging into the edge of the console. It wasn't victory, not the kind that would be written into history logs, but it was something better. It was survival with memory intact. She staggered down to the hatch, every step a new lesson in pain. Her hand shook as she unsealed it, and warm air gusted out, fragrant with that faint lavender ash scent she had come to recognize as them. The widow was waiting, crouched in the dark, her eyes wide with terror, until they landed on Ellen's bloodied silhouette. Then her breath caught. "You are alive," she said, her voice cracked but clear. They left?" Ellen nodded slowly, lips splitting into a smile that hurt to make. "Yeah," she whispered. "I made them bleed light. Turns out they don't." Like that. The widow crawled from the space, lifting her children gently, protectively. They stirred, blinking sleepily, unaware of how close the void had come. The mother turned to Ellen and bowed low, not the submissive kind, not the ritual kind, but a gesture raw with gratitude. "I do not know what to call you now," she said. "Protector, healer, fool." "Just Ellen," she murmured. "Just someone too stubborn to quit." They helped each other limp to the medbay. Ellen collapsed onto a bench while the widow gently, reverently, cleaned her wounds with shaking hands. "You nearly died," she whispered. "I've done that before," Ellen replied, staring at the ceiling. "This time I got to choose why." The widow paused, her fingers curled slightly on Ellen's wrist. "And you chose us, a stranger. A mother, 3 hungry children who could give you nothing in return. I chose not to lose another family," Ellen said softly. "Even if they were mine." The room quieted again. The hum of healing systems buzzed overhead, and in the cradle, one of the children made a soft, curious cooing noise that sounded like laughter wrapped in wonder. Ellen turned her head slowly, and something inside her cracked again, but it was not pain this time. It was awe. That sound light and new and impossibly brave was the proof. The proof that they had survived, that the song had not ended in silence. The widow laid her hand over Ellen's heart, palm trembling. "In my people's tongue," she said, "there is a word for one who binds the broken and faces the void. It does not translate, but if you allow it, I will call you that." Ellen smiled weakly. "Only if I get to name you back. Something that means braver than you should have had to be." They stayed there for hours, watching the children breathe. No more monsters scratched at the walls. No more shadows hunted their warmth, just the slow, sacred act of healing. Somewhere in the ship, a soft eye chime indicated that warp drive was ready. But Ellen didn't rush, for the first time in years. She wasn't running Dot, she was bringing someone home. Later, when the stars shifted and the engines roared to life, the Astera rose from the moon's grip like a phoenix from ash. It carried no cargo, no treasure, only the memory of a mother's song, the stubborn fire of a human's grief, and 3 small children who would grow up knowing they were saved not by war, but by love, somewhere in some distant part of the galaxy. The machines would whisper of the one they could not break, the human who chose kindness over surrender. Dot, and in doing so, proved that the most dangerous thing in the universe is a heart that refuses to forget.